Hi, Sam.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm fine. I'm good. How are you, honey?
I'm nervous, but I'm excited too.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Great. So then maybe I will just first introduce you to the audience.
Sure.
So I will read your artist statement out from your website. Samboleap Tol's artistic practice is largely informed by her experiences as a second-generation Cambodian. Her parents and their peers suffer from undiagnosed PTSD as war children, which had a detrimental effect in their homes growing up. Experiencing loss and displacement in her child and adulthood broke her heart completely, but also set it wide open. She learned to express compassion for others early on and understood the power of creating space for voices unheard. Today, she is especially moved by airing history that are painful, complex, and decolonial, because she believes reckoning with them will set everyone free. Sam gained her Bachelor's of Fine Arts at St. Lucas School for Arts and Design and Central St. Martin's at University of Arts, London. She obtained her Master in Fine Arts at Piet Zwart Institute here in Rotterdam, where she also won the Piet Zwart Research Awards for her thesis. This year, she was selected to go on a residency at Simenti Institute for Arts and Society in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And this month, she won the 10th edition of the Dolf Henkes Prize Awards, and that brings us here together.
Thank you.
So I'll just introduce myself very briefly. My name is Hani Kraiwee. I'm a curator and I'm a coordinator and producer at 1646 in The Hague. And so I will start with the first question. How did your journey as an artist start?
I came to arts in quite a roundabout way, so quite unconventional. I've always wanted to become an artist. I even applied for the Willem de Koning Art School here in Rotterdam when I was 18, and I got in, but my parents and family dissuaded me to pursue art. So I studied something else. I went to a media comms course at Erasmus University, where I ended up going to Australia on an exchange, University of Sydney. There I stayed with my aunt. She was one of the few remaining family members, and I stayed in Australia to work in online marketing. Afterwards, or actually during my time in Australia, I started to reconnect with my roots. Started going to Cambodia by myself for the first time. I started to understand that actually no stories were really being shared by my parents or my community with me. And I was really kind of missing this historical piece and source of knowledge, you know, in my how I viewed myself and also my community. So in Cambodia, I also met artists of my generation, whom I actually didn't know we had contemporary artists. And they inspired me to come back to art, so to return to my authentic calling. So at 25, I went to St. Lucas School of the Arts and Design in Antwerp, because I had this big plan of going to London. So I ended up going to Central St. Martin's, and I stayed there for a couple of years. I ended up studying there for a year, finished my bachelor's there, and then stayed back, did DJing, so I learned how to DJ there, worked in youth facilitation, and did some other like odd jobs here and there to make ends meet. And then just before the pandemic, I decided to return to the Netherlands, to Rotterdam specifically, and I applied for my MA during the pandemic, and then graduated last year, and now I'm here. So it's been only a journey of 5 years, of which of 8 years, of which 5 years are like studying at art. So I'm relatively new to the game.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I'm just wondering, because you said that you went to Australia and then you understand a bit more from your family. How come? How come you had to go to Australia to stay with your aunt to be able to understand your family history?
Sure, yeah. There's a whole bunch of different things at hand, I think. But mainly it was because I spent time with my great aunt, who liked to talk, and she was a little bit older than my mom and my dad. So if I look at the timeline of when the Khmer Rouge happened, or the American bombings happened, or people spending time in the refugee camp, which is all the 3 phases that my parents went through, and also my aunt, she was relatively older. So in hindsight, I'm thinking maybe the war had a different impact on her. The war meaning the genocide, Khmer Rouge, or even the war meaning America bombing Cambodia. Maybe it had like a different impact on her. And so I think her being older perhaps had a different way of processing these events, and maybe felt like inspired to talk to me about it. And I think, and while I was there, I was too young to really understand what was happening. I kind of pretended like I knew stories that she was telling me, but I didn't know. So to kind of make up for this disparity between me understanding her stories and me not knowing any, I went to Cambodia by myself to try and put the puzzle together, as it were. And also think it's something to do with perhaps our small community in the Netherlands. There are only like 1,500 of us, and I think only 570 came in the 80s. And so there's only so much of education that a community can do. If your parents or your elders in your community are not talkative about like these very traumatic events, then where else do you go for information? And the internet wasn't popping back then. You know, you go online and you'll see the same, I guess, flattened ideas of the global South. And so it's only now, I think, that more 3D, 4D sort of like ideas are created, or descriptions are created about the global South. Yeah,
Great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And also in your artistic practice, a large part of it is also researching. Has it been a bit of a difficult approach? Because I can imagine that the topics that you are researching, you don't see much of text or information online. And how do you verify that this is correct? And you deal with a lot of personal and, collective archive. How do you do research, and how could you just tell me about it?
Yeah, of course. This is a really interesting question. I think there are also multifolds answer to this. Let me think. I think there is a intuitive response to like textual sources, because my first bachelor's was in media and communication, and I had like a venture out into academia. I did research assistants, and then together with the professor, we published like a scholarly paper. And I saw then the ins and outs of how to like publish an academic article and what you need to do to verify it and what methodologies and stuff like that. So I think then I saw how many hoops you had to go through to get something published, as it were, to be factual. I saw that these particular methodologies, and I might be wrong, but I do think that they are derived of like the hard sciences. And so I felt that they were very removed of like my community and the way that we approached science and culture and fact. So, and then at the same time, not seeing anything verified or even true about Cambodians or other parts of Southeast Asia, only other than through the lens of like ethnography, right? And ethnography has its roots in something that we don't like to talk about, colonialism. And even the same thing goes for art. The first art exhibition here of a grand scale in Europe was the Paris World Exhibitions, where colonial artifacts were copied and then put there. And even colonial subjects were put there as a display. So all of like this whole section of sciences and what is factual, etc., has its root in an era we don't like to talk about. So I would say that information therefore becomes a bit sort of blurry because it hasn't been written from a perspective that would have benefited a person like me. And then there's this whole bunch of like other information that I'm familiar with, but it's hard for me to try and reach because either they're written in Khmer, which I can't read or write, or it's part of like, vernacular information, like we were talking about, like communal information, things that change. And I actually, maybe as a DJ or just as a Cambodian person, I prefer it because things are fluid, right? Things are not set in stone unless they're literally set in stone. But even the things that are set in stone come forth from a fluid time and space. And with historiography, you can see like once something else is being brought, like, you know, they find another inscription, the whole history kind of changes. So yeah, I guess there's a lot to say about information, how you find it. So I want to shout out to my partner. He developed an app called Rumah, meaning home or space, in Bahasa Indonesia. And it's like an app that he developed just for me and himself, where I can, anything that I find interesting, images or text or whatever that I found, most often on TikTok and Instagram, I just put in there. And so when you scroll, it's like you're in wherever, from Maluku to Thailand to Cambodia. It's all of the things that I come across. And to maybe another person is really like, this looks like, day-to-day stuff, a cup of water, glass, or stuff like that. But I think those personal things really interest me. And I think in the terms of history, it's not the victories or it's not the conquering that interests me, but how people lived and what structures were there to kind of support that. So things like religion or Buddhism or animism or certain cosmologies and stuff like that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
No worries.
And that when you said that you cannot speak or write Khmer, but in your work here at TENT, there is a work that there is letters or a script in Khmer.
Yeah.
How did that work? Could you tell us more about it?
Of course. That work, it's called Tales of the Past, Tales spelled Tails, like a tail, monktail. The work indeed has Khmer script, and it does it is a reflection for the fact that I can't read or write, or have tried for the last 15 years to read or write. At first, I was at Jamati Institute of Art and Society in Yogyakarta on my first residency. And with the Javanese curator, we went to one of the oldest museums called Sonobodoyo. And as we were walking through the museum, I saw an inscription of the 10th century, something like this. And when I looked at the letters or the script, it looked like so much like Khmer, like so much. And my Javanese colleagues, they were like, oh yeah, that's old Javanese, dot. And I thought to myself, can't you guys see that this is like Khmer? But of course, they hadn't seen the Khmer scripts because Cambodia is not necessarily a super popular place in Java. So we walked through the museum and I went home and I just couldn't get this script out of my head. We were also having this conversation about that it's old Javanese. So that means that it's a script that Javanese people can't read anymore either. There's only like one little class where they teach it. Shout out to Pak Jo. And Bahasa Indonesia is now a Latin script because of the Dutch, right? And they do have like modern Javanese, which is a simplified script. So I wonder, why is Khmer script the same? Has stayed the same for centuries, and why has Javanese script changed? And I think it was kind of like epic. To me, it's epic that I was standing there with a curator from Java who also couldn't read his ancestral script, and neither can I, even though I'm only like one generation away from it, and I have some more resources to learn from it. But it was kind of tragic, we were trying to like connect with our past by going to a museum and understanding these civilizations, and we've just lost the script. Yeah,
that's sad.
It is sad.
Yeah, it's like there's this gap that you don't know, and then you have to read from other people's perspective to be able to understand, but you don't know if it's accurate or not. Yeah. And that's the Ancestor. It is like a recurring theme or practice in your work, because in the other work, would you like to talk about it more? I think the Ancestor is very present in that work.
Yes, absolutely right. It's called Dharma Songs version 2. That's kind of the centerpiece of my part of the show. It stood in the middle. It's a table made of teak, and on top of it is a gong, but upside down. So it stands like a bowl, and I've put water in it. And surrounding the gong are flowers, some of them artificial and some of them real. So as a visitor, if you enter the room, a host will invite you to dip one of the fresh flowers in the water, and then a voice will start playing. Indeed, ancestor veneration is actually the major theme in this work and also of the last 3-4 years. I would say that it's important to me because of a few things, one of which is ancestral veneration is something that Cambodians have done for a long time. Like, for instance, poetry singing about death has been around since the 4th century. And I was reading this book the other day called Death Power, which kind of chronologizes ancestral veneration in Khmer culture. And it was wondering why funeral rituals have stayed relatively the same throughout all of those centuries. Like, you would think that times like the Khmer Rouge or any other wars would change particular traditions, but the funeral ancestral things have kind of stayed the same. So that's quite interesting to me in terms of value. Like, why does a civilization hold on to what particular value, and what does it give to a society? And that looking at it from a Dutch angle, as in, this doesn't exist in the same extended way as it exists in Khmer culture. So I think as a bicultural person, so someone who grew up here, I'm often wondering from both perspectives, why is this valuable to society? And I think that it is valuable, especially considering since my father passed away in 2021 during the pandemic, I've had so much, so much strength from ancestral veneration, to be honest. Like, I feel like it's helped me have trust in life. And so on the one hand, it's like a thing that I'm trying to understand what value it is, and maybe even other practices from other civilizations, or even things that happened here, and why it has left and is gone in this neoliberal society. Why and when, and can it come back, and in which way? And on the other hand, I think I have a unique position as a child of a refugee family, and I think there are more people like me in the Netherlands who are allochtoon, non-native native, who might be extraordinary disconnected from their origins. So because of all the things that we said before, it's harder for them to gain access to information, cultural information, historical information about where they are and who they come from, like where they are and who they are and where they come from. And so the practice of ancestral veneration, I think, really helps bring me closer to, all the ancestors that have gone and perished in all of these horrific wars, but also giving me this sense of trust, and in the end also giving me the sense of I come from somewhere. Because sometimes growing up here and living here, it feels like I've just sprung out of nowhere, because I'm not reflected in media or in politics or even in books or fiction or whatever. I'm just out there. And this reminds me and grounds me. I come from many ancestral, many generations, and they've done many different things in art, in religion, in sciences, etc. And that empowers me.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
No worries.
Beautifully said, as always. Wait, I have more questions. So with the gong works that you just mentioned, there are flowers, but how do you choose the flowers? Do each flowers have different meanings? Because you also made one version which was in Indonesia. Yeah, but the significance of the flowers.
Yes. Thanks for that question. I think that the flowers are, for me, a reference to my father, who, when his life ended, was a farmer. So he became a farmer again. I think he did come from a farming family, and on the other hand, many flowers were used, or many living things were used in these traditions. So when it comes to flowers, to food, etc., in like offering traditions. And so much of the flowers used, and actually the whole artwork has all sorts of references to different offering traditions in Southeast Asia. Now, for the Yogyakartan iteration of this work, I used the plumeria, which is a flower that's grown quite abundantly in Southeast Asia, in parks and stuff, but they also grow at temple sites. They're used in Indian offerings, and they're even used, like they're, for instance, they're widespread, like they are, for instance, in Jamaica and other places. But they're called bunga Kamboja in Bahasa Indonesia, which means Cambodian flower.
Yeah.
And nobody can tell me why they're called Cambodian flower. Probably if I would ask a botanist with like a history background, they could tell me. But yeah, it was like the name of the flower is the Cambodian flower. And then this version, the flowers are from like the local flower shop, but I used an essential oil called Champacha magnolia. And, a lot of people, when they smell it, it's reminiscent of Cambodia, that particular area, maybe Thailand even. And I like that particular scent or even that flower because it's set to be a family of the magnolia family. And that's set to date back to 92 million years ago. 92 million years. So these are our true ancestors, these flowers. So yeah, I use all kinds of flowers like roses, and they're used in like Javanese offerings and stuff like that. So a whole bunch of flowers.
Yeah. And then do you do you do offerings in your daily life? For example, if you go to a Thai restaurant, you'll see on a shelf, there is some sort of a statue that people would give offering. There would be some flowers, which I think the similar flower, the yellow flowers that I don't know the scientific names, and some water and some other thing that is precious to them. Do you have any offering, or what's it called?
Yeah, we do.
Home?
Yeah, we do. I'm curious, maybe we can have a chat about that afterwards, like about the Thai offerings, because I think they look similar to Khmer offerings. And yes, we do in Khmer diasporic culture. I grew up with it, especially during September, October. There is a festival called Pchongbun, which is the ancestral veneration festival. And that's where, you go temple, and then there's monks and you offer food for them. And then at home you pray, you create an offering and then you pray to your ancestors and stuff. So I think it's from that habit, or perhaps teachings from my parents. Even when my father is so blatantly not religious, we would still do it. So it's a cultural thing. And I think those cultural things signify Khmerness, because, for instance, if I share my work online and share this particular work, many people, Cambodians in the States, have responded saying, "Hey, I recognize this." And it's not like we have a gong in the house with flowers that you put, but it's rather an aesthetic and cultural reference to it. And I think, people like you and me, we recognize it.
Yeah, we see, this means this. I have seen this before. Yeah, so it's really nice to see this cultural work in the context of an art exhibition in the Netherlands. So
I think there's a last reference, which I forgot to mention, is during Waisak, which is Waisak, which is the Buddha birthday and reincarnation. In Indonesia, it was in June. But when I celebrated this in Australia, I remember going to the temple there, and then I picked up a flower, and I had to put it in perfumed water and then wash a baby Buddha. And because we come from a small community and we have no temple in the Netherlands, I was like, whoa, this is cool. I'm bathing Buddha. Like, what the... And then I remember doing it at Waisak, at Borobudur, which is the largest Buddhist site in the world. I did it there, and I was like, this is a cool thing to do. So one of the things is Waisak inspired, so really much Buddhist inspired.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
One, I think it's gonna be the last question.
Sure.
So, I guess you must have been very busy. Could you share with us what are your upcoming projects after you finish this show at TENT?
Actually, I have had a really busy year, but coming up, I think it's a little bit calmer, so I'm very happy about that. Currently, I'm an artist in resident at RIP Art Space in Rotterdam South, where I'm exploring Southeast Asian instruments, which is kind of the other theme and interest that inspired the work in the middle. So I'm looking at Southeast Asian instruments and how they're made and what they sound like, etc., and the mysticism around it, especially. And apart from that, I have a show next year in London with my best friend, Jerome. We have a show at Niru Ratnam in London. And apart from that, I'm kind of free, so I'm cool. I'm looking for a studio, so if anyone has a studio, shout me out.
Now I have a very last question,
Sure.
but I think you can answer extensively. Do you I'm just curious to know, what do you think? Why in Southeast Asia there's a lot of mysticism in the practice or in the culture?
Ooh. So I am an amateur historian, enthusiast with only a recent interest of this. So I think before I was more into putting people together and creating a voice together, and maybe it was more of a binary thing where I was, looking at like white supremacy and then people of color issues, etc. It's only recently, since coming to Rotterdam, I think, where I've really honed in to Southeast Asian culture and traditions and history. And this was also inspired by tutors in the UK who really told me, you can really trust yourself in this stuff. My theory, historians, don't kill me, is I think there is... I wouldn't be able to explain why mysticism exists anywhere else. I mean, it's there in Sufism, it's there in different places. So I wouldn't say like Southeast Asia is particularly exceptional in this, but I do think there's something to do with the Indianization, the Hinduization that happened all across Southeast Asia, which also was in Java, in Bali, in Malaysia, in Thailand, and in Cambodia. And I think that's also the common root and why I thought Khmer scripts look so much like old Javanese, and why some of the temples in Java look so much like the temples in Cambodia and in Thailand, etc. So we have a common influence or ancestor. And from the book, there's lots to talk about Brahmin culture and offerings. And I know way too little about Indian religions and cultures, especially from the 4th century, whatnot. But I do, whenever they refer to Brahmin culture as opposed to Buddhist culture, they think that it's more of a mysticism thing, like to do with spirits and ancestors and offerings. Because, in Buddhism, the spirits kind of are like, you guys do not belong in this doctrine, where it's all about you and your mind and Buddha and like the teachings of Buddha, but not about appeasing to a hungry ghost that's like still wandering around Earth because it hasn't gone to the next level because of some karmic tie. And so I would explain that through an Hindi or an Indian tie, whether that's Buddhism or Hinduism from back in the day. That's why I think, because I feel like, that's it. That's all I know. But if you know more, like anyone who is really well versed in this, please hit me up on my DMs or send me an email, because I'd love to learn more, and it's especially hard from Rotterdam to try and understand that apart from reading a bunch of books. Yeah.
I think my take on that would be,
I'm curious.
As the person grew up with it, like mythicism and a lot of superstition, I think it's a way to keep people in check. So there's a power that you don't know.
Yeah.
And you just keep feeding it because you believe that this is higher than you.
Yeah.
And it's going to have influence on you, either good or bad. So for me, it is a way of a tool. It's a power tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. In this book, they were talking about how these particularly funeral rituals help reinforce understanding a Khmer person where they are in the cosmology, and it informs morality. So I think what you're saying, like, it informs what's good and what's bad, and something might come after you when you sleep if you're doing the worst things. So it basically comes down to that. Yeah. All right. Well,
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for the conversation. It was really nice.
It was very nice. Also, thank you very much.
Thank you.